let me go ahead and begin. Welcome everyone to today's conversation. My name is Michael Goodhart. I'm director of the Global Studies Center at the University of Pittsburgh and also a professor of political science here. And it's my privilege to host this conversation today with two really outstanding women whose stories I think you're going to find compelling and who can also shed a lot of light for us into some really important contemporary issues about free expression, censorship, social media, and so on. Before we begin that conversation, let me give you some very brief background about why both of our guests are here today in some very broad sense. It's because with the support of the Office of the Provost, in 2019, Pitt started a Scholars at Risk program. We had in the past hosted several scholars from the Scholars at Risk national program over the years, but this new Pitt program enables us to host a scholar annually. And so in January of 2020, we were joined by Professor Simten, who's here with us today, as our first Scholar at Risk faculty fellow. And she's been with us since then, thanks to good fortune and good timing, and in partnership with the Artist Protection Fund and our friends at City of Asylum, who have also partnered with us in making Professor Goshar's visit possible. And also our friends at the International Free Expression Project, all of that came together to enable us to host a second guest in this program. That's Khoi, who's here as an Artist Protection Fund Fellow in residence at Pitt. So this program is designed to provide a safe space for scholars, artists, and others to come and pursue their work in an environment that makes it possible for them to have both the physical and mental space to do so, but also then is designed to help us bring their stories, their experience, their expertise to the wider Pitt and Pittsburgh communities. And so this conversation today is part of that effort. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to the two of them to tell you a little bit about themselves. And from there, we'll get our discussion going. So Simten, if you don't mind kicking us off, I'll ask you to go first and tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be here. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me here and giving me the opportunity to tell the story. But when I'm telling the story, or mine or anybody else, I kind of out of the professional kind of commitments or affiliations, I don't know, or history, I tend to integrate it into the story of a larger frame. So I'll not be talking personal right now, but it's my story at the same time. So as you know, I signed a statement calling for the state to end the violence against civilians in Kurdish towns of eastern and southeastern Turkey, the Kurdish majority provinces of Turkey. The statement is titled, "We will not be a party to this crime." It went public in January 2016. It's a statement signed by 1,128 academics, mostly from Turkey and some from abroad. In its first round, it was 1,128 signatories. And then after we started to have attacks from the government circles, fascistic figures and organizations and extreme nationalists, we started to circulate the statement once more among the academics, and it reached to more than 2,000 signatures. So starting with the day one of the new phase of authoritarian neoliberalism in the university campuses, as I tend to name it symbolically, because it was nothing that happened out of the blue, we witnessed consistently increasing repression on academic freedom, which in practice contains freedom of speech and research and teaching. Turkey had never been without problems in terms of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, with respect and by the respect in terms of the respect by the state to the freedom of expression of opposition groups or individuals in opposition. And this was the case mostly regarding the political left and Kurdish opposition throughout the Republican era. So this is nothing new, but the level of repression and the extent of the repression is new under the Justice and Development Party governments, which have been in power since 2002. Sorry about this. So it has been almost 2 decades of rule by the Justice and Development Party government. It expanded and systematized its power through repression in a gradual fashion. At first, it kind of appeared as a conservative liberal political party and government. In its first years, it claimed to some kind of corresponding example of Christian Democrats in Europe, which was without no problems, but it was not claiming or displaying the identity of a party with Islamist authoritarian tendencies and in a fascistic relation to the political sphere. So it came about, I mean, there are turning points, of course. It came about by the 2009 tekel resistance, the resistance of the workers of tobacco factories in Turkey who claimed their rights for their social rights. The government adopted an amendment to the law which deprived the tobacco workers from their already acquired social rights. So they went on general strike, and throughout Turkey, thousands of tobacco workers marched to Ankara, the capital city, and stayed there for 78 days in their tents until repressively, forcefully pulled out by the police forces with the order of the government. You know, in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of expression through social media, that was one of the most manifest instances when independent citizen journalism started to show its face, because we would see a lot of supporting groups that would offer their solidarity, try to offer their solidarity with different means to the tekel workers' resistance in 2009 until March 2010. But we would see the students, we would see the filmmakers, mostly leftist again, and or feminists. We would see them to go to the strike field and to film the resistance groups, to film the individual daily stories of the resistance groups, which the government then, the Justice and Development Party government, was framing as the others, as the enemies of the people as such. So we would see there the use of the media, mass media by the government, and also the social media by the government, with all its resources to frame the workers as traitors, not as terrorists at that time, but as traitors, and also as the others of the people who were actually striking against the common interests of the people at large. And we would see the citizen journalists countering this information network. And that was really important at that time. Social media as a critical site for the opposition and the corresponding governmental repression would take a radical turn shortly after this resistance. During the Gezi resistance in 2013. I will not go into detail about this resistance because I know I have not that much time, and I don't want to steal the time from Khoi. Sorry, Khoi. But the resistance made it possible for the getting of various and at times opposing political and social opposition groups, contesting social opposition groups, together against the authoritarian claims of the Justice and Development Party to monopolize the use of a public sphere, a public space for commercial interests again. What we would see there again, the organization of the resistance through social media. because the mass media at that time had already been under the control of the Just and Development Party and all those interest groups and those business circles with affiliation to the Just and Development Party. So if I go through the facts, I mean, these are both, hopeful examples, but at the same time, they show the drastic or rather heartbreaking extent to which the government can go in using violence against resistances, peaceful resistances. Both Tekke resistance and Gezi resistance were peaceful resistance against the government policies, but both were crushed by use of extensive police violence. In 2020, Turkey ranked second after Russia on the basis of penalties that the European Court of Human Rights ruled due to the violation of the freedom of expression. In 2019, 400,494 websites, 132,000 URL addresses, 7,000 Twitter accounts, and 10,000 YouTube videos, and 6,200 Facebook contents were banned by the government. In the same year, 53,814 social media accounts were examined, and 24,224 people were subjected to judicial procedures on the accusations of propagandizing for the organization. This means for PKK, which is considered to be a terrorist organization in Turkey, inciting hatred and hostility among the people, aiming at the destruction of the unity of state and to the security of life of the society, and containing hate discourse. This article is important, inciting violence, provoking violence, aiming at the unity of the state, and also insulting the state, the military, and the president. This article is really important in Turkish criminal penal code, because it has been the most referred one in almost all the trials started against the social media posts of individuals or organizations. So I will be just ending this. Am I running too much out of time? Can I continue? Yeah. So thank you very much. So in 2019, at least 31 were detained on the accusations of insulting the president. 16 of these were arrested, and one is released on the condition of judicial control. Within the scope of the crimes against the symbols of the state's sovereignty and the respectability of its organs, 139,000 were put on trial. 438 of these are children. This is really important. And 1,970 of these trials were ended by the decision of acquittal, but 4,291 were ended by the decision of criminal penalty or imprisonment. Again, in 2019, one of the most significant barriers, as I said beforehand, to the full exercise of freedom of expression in Turkey turned out to be insulting the president. The president all the times starts trial, goes to the court, criminal court, because he thinks that he is also the state. When an opposition group or an individual, even among the leaders of the main opposition parties criticize him. He takes it personally, he takes it as an insult, and he goes to the criminal court. And most of the time, he is rewarded, so they are punished. The criticism against the president is almost unacceptable in my country right now. So that is how my experience ties to the restriction of freedom of speech. The statement that I signed was mainly circulated online. I received it by email. I signed it by email. So, though I'm not a totally social media person, especially during the pandemic, everything turned into online. But after that signature too, all of my connection with opposition in Turkey turned to be mostly online. As an academic, I felt it my responsibility to sign the statement and ask the state to fulfill its responsibility responsibility to guarantee the security of its citizens, of the life of the citizens, because massive numbers of people, mainly of Kurdish origin, were being killed at that time by the military forces, either the guerrillas or the state military forces. A pro-peace stance that I embraced by an online signature turned me into, in the eyes of the state, into a threat to the state. I was supposed to insult the state, insult the military forces, because by asking the state to stop the violence, I was supposed to be aiding or propagandizing for the PKK, the guerrilla forces of the Kurdish political movement, who have been in war, in armed struggle against the Turkish military forces since early 1980s onwards, and in the Kurdish populated regions of the country. So in the eyes of the state, I was turned into a threat to the state, insulting the state, propagandizing for terrorists, and thus betraying the nation and the state. From then on, I was warned to be careful in what I write in emails, on Facebook, on Instagram. These are the only ones that I use on social media. On any other social media platform, both by well-intentioned acquaintances and by the state indirectly. I could just assume what being careful means, for I have always been certain that what I share, write, or say has nothing to do with insults, endangering someone's life or the life of a society, whatever meaning we put on it, the life of a society. So I continued, I'm still continuing. I'm happy to answer all the questions. That's all for me right now.
Thank you so much, Simten. And there's a lot I want to ask you, but first let's hear, if we could, from Khoi. My Khoi, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I'm very happy to share with you today the story about my activism. My activism is focusing on freedom of expression as well. Before 2016, I was a pop star in Vietnam. But I couldn't stand the censorship system as an artist. I couldn't stand it anymore. So I decided to make a change. I nominated myself for the National Assembly election in 2016 as the independent candidate. Yeah, as the candidate independent from the Communist Party. I thought my nomination will raise awareness for people about the political participation rights. And because I was still famous at that time, I think what I am doing, people will pay their attention on, and they might have some ideas. And I also want to put the end for the censorship system as well. But I was rejected from the ballot. They didn't allow me to join the election. They start to make problems to me. Like the police came and raided my concert for the first time. After my nomination 2 weeks, they came and raided my concert and then banned me from singing in public. At that time, I still could use social media. I used Facebook to do the live stream concert, because when I know I've been banned from singing in public, but I still need a platform to release my new songs and talk with my audience. So I use live stream. But then the police, the government, put more threats on me. They detained me. They evicted me from my house. I have to move all the time because my life was not stable. When the police know where I am living, they will try to kick me out of the house by put the pressure on the landlord to kick me out of the house. So I moved to Hanoi, and then I formed the trio band, and we use in my music, we create music to raise awareness for people about freedom of expression, about politics and human rights. Because actually not many people in Vietnam even know what freedom of expression is. So I keep doing that. It's very hard to engage people, but I still, because I have music, I have my fame, and I try to do that all my best. I organized secret concerts in our private studio, and I have a lot of people came to my concerts, my private studio. But the police again raided our studio, find us, and threatened our family's member. And when I know that Trump came to my country, I went to protest him to show people what freedom of expression looks like and to practice my rights in my own country. But then I was evicted from my house again in the middle of the night. And it created a big debate about freedom of expression, because from that, Trump supporters, most of Vietnamese support Trump. They abandoned me, and they defame me. They swear me. They really don't understand between the difference between freedom of expression and criticize an individual person. So I realized that I couldn't stay in my country longer, because the longer I stay, the more dangerous for me. The police could arrest me anytime they want. So I flew to the US in 2019. I had I have a residency program in New York for 1 year, and then now come to Pittsburgh under the Artist Protection Fund Fellowship. And now I am still working on my activism and working on my musical project called Bad Activist, with the help and support from artists from Pittsburgh University to raise awareness about these issues.
Thank you both for sharing that. Something that was interesting to me in what both of you said was the way that social media can both help to spread messages and organize people on the one hand, and also provides a place or a mechanism for the state to monitor and repress. And Khoi, I know you've had some experiences with Facebook and trying to deal with some of this. Could I ask you to tell us a little bit about that? And then Simten, I'm going to come and ask you about what the big social media companies have been up to in Turkey. But Khoi, tell us a little bit about your Facebook experience.
Yes. So Vietnam had internet in 1991, but until 2001, people just started to use internet and social media. And we were very happy because we now have a free space to talk, and we can create the public debate. Before we couldn't say anything. Yeah, the government owned and controlled the national media. So now we have internet and social media. We can organize many things on internet, and yeah, it was really nice. We were very, very happy, but it's not last long. In 2004, the Vietnamese government create the firewall to stop people from accessing some websites that they don't like some websites like Talawas and Tiền Vệ and Giam Màu or Human Rights Watch or Amnesty, or the websites things that have criticized the government. So in 2006, they arrest the first blogger, which is very famous. His name is Nguyễn Văn Hải. His blog called Điếu Cày. And then, like 2007, they arrest more people, and then more people until now. I really work very hard. I try to save the only safe space we have in Vietnam for people to talk freely. So I have met with Facebook and Google to advocate to them to use their leverage to save freedom of expression online. At the beginning, it was more than 2 years ago. Yeah. At the beginning, they say they will do something, but they didn't do anything to resolve their issues. The government released the new cybersecurity law, which is criminalize the online activities. And those companies, like social media companies like Facebook and Google, are complying with the government to silence dissent. They have to follow the government requests to block and delete posts and accounts of activists and independent journalists. And also, there is government supporters. Vietnamese government also have a force called E47 force. They are roaming on the internet all day to manipulating the public opinion, target dissidents, and silence dissent. They are abusing Facebook community standard to have account locked and post delete. So when I work with Facebook, I provide them many evidence about these groups. And Facebook didn't do anything. They have some meetings with me. They let me talk with them. They have one person to work with me when every time we have activist account lock or delete, I was able to ask that person in Facebook to help to reactivate our account. But it's not enough. Like, I wondered why they don't change their community standards, why they let these groups keep abusing their community standard. And now they showing that they are complying with the government. So they didn't work as they promised. Like Mark Zuckerberg said, Facebook will protect freedom of expression online. That's what he said. But what they do is opposite.
Thank you. Simten, I'm curious whether the big social media companies behave similarly in Turkey, how they work with the government, what kind of relationships there are. Does the government, delete and shut down the accounts of activists? Do they have a comparable troll army? Those kinds of things. Could you tell us a little bit how that plays out in the Turkish case?
Let me start from the most recent and go backwards until perhaps 2007. Sorry. So in last year in July, in early July, Turkey had the parliament passed a new law on social media, of course, by the visible dominance of the president. And that it kind of offered the grounds for the president and the governing party to have legal tools, let me put it that way, to control international social media outlets and to control the activities of companies, international or transnational social media companies in Turkey. So from that day on, it gave the rulers in Turkey, the law gave the rulers in Turkey to control the activities of YouTube, the activities of Twitter, the activities of Facebook within the Turkish borders by asking for and guaranteeing the presence of representatives from each and every company in Turkey, physically present, in order to be accountable for the inquiries coming from the Turkish government. I mean, Michael, the laws that have been enacted since for about a decade or so are so irrational that it is really difficult for me to coin it in the right words. So I'm on the one hand, I'm translating from Turkish, and on the other hand, I'm trying to rationalize them. So that's the case. But this is not the only case where you see the government stepping in to regulate the social media, especially the transnational frame through which the social media venues operate, or through which individuals use social media venues. So we have YouTube, for example, which is the most frequently banned, shut down website in Turkey. And there is this, I just want to put an ironic mark there. There is this story and a fact, actually, where the president orders the shutting down of YouTube due to the uploading of an insulting video against the founder of the Turkish Republic, that is Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, actually, which he runs counter, which he all the time insults, whom he all the time insults, the current president. So there is a Greek citizen putting an insulting video on YouTube, and that is why the YouTube was shut down in Turkey. So we couldn't access it back in 2014 or something. And at the same time, during a press conference, the president criticizes the main opposition party members, attacking a woman with a headscarf, a Muslim woman, a devout and a committed voter of the Just and Development Party. And he tells that, well, you can access the incidents, the video of the incidents on YouTube. The opposition party members attacking the woman, the AKP, the Just and Development Party supporter. And when he is reminded of the fact that YouTube is not accessible in Turkey, it is shut down by himself, he says that, well, I can access, so you can find ways. So this is the way things work arbitrarily. This is I just wanted to give as an ironical example, but we had the case of the shutting down of Wikipedia during the Gezi resistance mostly. That was in 2013, but it's not only at that time. Frequently it is being shut down. In 2017 too, it was shut down. In almost every year it's shut down, but then still after a certain period of time it starts to operate again. We had the case of Twitter being shut down in Turkey, but the case with social media, as you said, there's this double face. On the one hand, it's a site for an increasingly easy way of the government to track the opposition groups and individuals, but it's at the same time a site for the opposition groups and individuals to find alternative ways, to find niches, to access information if they want it. I mean, like changing the DNS, what it's called, the DNS settings of the computers and so on and so forth. So this has been the case, and this all of us have used during times of shutdown. I hope I could respond to your question, but I'm not sure.
Oh, thank you. That's really helpful. I mean, one thing that occurs to me, and I'm sure to a lot of people, it's a fairly obvious point, but one worth making is that, when these corporate platforms become public spaces, they're not public in the same way that we think of, a town square or something which is, genuinely open and available to people, because obviously the desire to make profit means that their primary goal is to continue operating in whatever market they're operating in. And if the government won't allow them to operate unless they follow certain conditions, then the logic of, profit seeking demands that they'll do what the government asks them to do. So, we talk about, and this became a huge issue, obviously, in our own recent presidential election in the United States, right, with the former president telling outrageous lies on a regular basis using his Twitter account. And nothing was done about it. Facebook, the same. Google-owned platforms, the same. Despite the fact that he blatantly violated all of the stated policies until a violent, racist, misogynist mob stormed the Capitol, at which time then suddenly, I guess the fear of economic instability began to outweigh the other concerns, and corporations began to demand some things. And so now, mercifully, I suppose in some respects, Trump has been banned from these some of these platforms. Again, it just shifts elsewhere. It's a real conundrum. Khoi, did you want to say something?
No. I think Trump is banned from Twitter and some other platform as well.
I think also I don't, to be honest, I don't know. I try not to pay. I don't. Twitter is the only one I'm on. I know he was banned at least temporarily from Facebook, but he may have been.
Yeah. So there is a big debate about that as well, because people are talking about why Twitter's ban Trump, and it's violated human rights, his freedom of expression right. Yeah, a lot of people talking about this, and we don't really know that is the right decision from Twitter's or not.
May I just add something? I mean, as you said, we're living in a corporate world. So, I mean, and when we are talking about international communication networks, it's never free from the corporate interests. And I mean, I can never compare the repressive state tools, the repressive instruments of the state, with the repression that comes in a rather invisible fashion from the corporate interest, the working of the corporate interest that work together. For me, I mean, by the way, as you said, that it's never a public space as the physical public spaces that we run into each other and get into communication and come up with something, perhaps with the possibility of something new and collective action. For the way I could observe how social media works is not as a public space, I guess, but as an opportunity sphere that facilitates our options for counter public spaces out of the social media. If we restrict ourselves, especially in non-pandemic times, to social media, in our resistance or opposition, then we are kind of caught in a tightrope. Is it the right way to put it? Between corporate interests and state repression. We cannot move out of it. So, but for the communication, I mean, I guess it is a big opportunity, of course, for the urban sites, of course, for those with working internet connections, and of course, for those who can access to free internet connection or who can pay for the internet connection. That's the other part of it. Let me stop.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question that's been posed here, and I want to share it with you because I think it speaks directly to this point and to this tension that we're circling around. And you know, the question says, you know, the long history of the public is that the commons and the public sphere are not policed governmentally or corporately, but really that it's typically done more locally, and that operates through norms about class and gendered and racialized access to those kinds of spaces. So we think of, you know, the coffee house in Europe as the kind of paradigmatic example of this, right? And so the question is really, is this corporatization of the public sphere really so different from the way in which these previous, more locally and more socially structured public spheres operated to exclude and define people? Or put differently, if was the public ever really public or separate from the influence of capital over the last 300 years or so? And if it was, you know, what differences, what are the really important differences now?
Should
do you want to I mean, I have a thought on that, but I'd rather hear you respond.
Yeah. Would you like to continue, Khoi? Or should I?
Yeah, you go ahead, please.
Okay. So with those coffee houses, I mean, yes, it's the corporate interest, and there were we had the white bourgeois and public sphere as a bourgeois fact, you know, the newly emerging bourgeois fact, as against aristocratic salons, perhaps, or as an alternative to not necessarily against, but as an alternative and a claimant to the knowledge production or circulation in the aristocratic, closed aristocratic salons. But it has its own closed sphere. But at the very same time, in European history, we had, and also in the North American history, we also had, for example, church as a gathering place for Black opposition, especially the Black workers. As far as the historians, like, I don't know whether I can pronounce it right, but Geoff Ellie documents. And also we would have the women's public spheres. Of course, not necessarily with the discussion topics and the strategies for action that were deemed to be public by the dominant bourgeois. Bourgeois public spheres, or bourgeois actors of the newly emerging public spheres. In this case, what I understand is that social media makes it more visible for alternative and counter voices for claims for alternative public spheres, alternative political activism to be heard. As far as my experiences with such organizing examples are concerned. For example, I had been involved in this feminist and queer researchers network, which is an online organization from its launch onwards, and still acting on an online fashion, especially during the pandemic time, acting purely on an online fashion. I have been in the founding group and also in the founding moderator team of the group. It's horizontally organized, and it is an initiation mainly by the academics in exile, but not necessarily from Turkey, but not necessarily academics from, you would have researchers from non-academic positions too, and in the case of the academics in exile, from non-university organizations too, places too. So what you see there is the formation of, is the trial to form circles that do not necessarily relate to project making, asking for fundraising activities, asking for funding institutions, that do not necessarily relate to state, actually, which kind of avoid state interference or relation to the state, but trying to cultivate knowledge sharing and knowledge production with a feminist perspective. It is really difficult because we all have our own tendencies inscribed on us through the socialization in university campuses and also in a private, free market culture, especially under neoliberal times. But pandemic showed us that we could take steps for alternative knowledge production, though not as quickly as we hope it to be, but this is one point. And there we would have most of the marginalized people's researchers from the universities. We would have the Kurdish participants, we would have the queer participants, we would have feminists as the usual immoral subjects in the academy in Turkey too. So that's an important example for me and an encouraging one. I should share that. Yeah. Did I just, start from somewhere and end it somewhere? I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was really interesting. And I would just add maybe also in response to the question that I think it points importantly to the fact that the public sphere or spheres are always notional spaces, right? They're never kind of real physical or other kinds of spaces, and they're constantly sites of contestation, right? So that includes the fact that part of what's contested is who's included and who's excluded, right? The kind of ideal of a kind of Habermasian public sphere that is somewhere between the private and the economic, and it exists as this sort of uncontaminated space. I mean, completely ignores the operation of power, whether it's corporate power or state power or patriarchy or racial power, whatever it might be. And so, when we think about public spheres as being contested, then I think we can think the power politics much more effectively. And when I think about that, I think of what Khoi said earlier about taking her concerts into private studio space, right? But then the government comes anyway. So it's an effort to create a space where discourse and expression can happen, and then the government becomes aware of that space and intrudes. And so in a way, social media is less the issue than simply a technology that seems to make both the communication and organization and the tracking in a sense easier. I want to here's a question that's come in, Simten. This is I think one for you, and it's more or less a factual question. And the questioner wants to know: did the persecution or the limitations on free speech really begin with the supposed coup attempt, or was the problem were things getting worse even before, and was that just an acceleration?
I mean, it was worse. It was always negative. There have always been governmental repression on freedom of speech in Turkey, critical speech, especially coming from leftists, as I said before, and the Kurdish opposition. They have been the usual suspects, and also the LGBTI too. I should not forget that point too. Because we always see that they are the first targets to be suppressed in the name of amoral activism, immoral speech that would hurt the norms and morals of the Muslim majority in the country, that is the society in the country. So that's one thing. The other thing is that there's this consistent repression of leftists and Kurdish critical voices from the Kurdish population. But yes, you're right. By the turn during the coup attempt, what you see is that the government and the president found the legitimizing grounds to initiate their almost extraordinary lawmaking, arbitrary lawmaking process that would restrict more than ever the critical voices, that would suppress more than ever, that would justify the marginalization, the exclusion, and if possible, elimination of those opposing voices. So yes, but at the same time, no, it's not something new or unexpected. That's really important. May I put a point, if I'm not talking too much, for what you said, Michael, about the government tracking you? I mean, if the government, if you wanted to be tracked, if you wanted to be framed, if the government wants to frame you, track you, and marginalize you, it has all the tools. It doesn't need the social media, because this is the case since the imperial times onwards. So we always have this record of freedom of expression being violated by increasing authoritarian or despotic governments. I think what is crucial here, or what I kind of take into consideration more, it's not like I'm putting the government repression into a less important position, but what I consider more important is the way we relate to this repression, the risk of repression and how this unfolds. That is when organized action comes in. And surprisingly, I wouldn't be saying this because I'm not a social media person. I have never been. Surprisingly, compared to 5 years ago, right now I'm thinking that social media is an important tool for organizing locally, nationally, and internationally.
Let me throw that same question to Khoi. We're almost out of time, but how are you feeling about I mean, despite the problems that you've encountered and the various difficulties, I know that you've been targeted by this groups like the C47 and others. I mean, do you see social media, Khoi, as a tool that you'll continue to use, or that's important for activism, or if not, where do you see the important developments happening?
Yeah, I think social media is the only tool we have in Vietnam to express ourselves, because we have nowhere to go to talk freely. So social media is so important for us. Right now, Vietnam have 68 million users using Facebook. And that's the only platform we can do something. We can talk with each other. We can organize things. And yeah, if that platform is shut down, we might have another platform, but we will completely under control if we lost that space. So we are trying so hard to keep Facebook. Also, we have to face with the government threats at the same time.
Yeah, I think you've really put a good point on it. This thing is both fraught and difficult to do without. I mean, it's a problem, but we need it. And to that extent, I think our conversation today has raised as many questions as it's answered. Our point was never to provide an expert commentary on the use of social media. That's none of our areas of expertise, but rather to share with our audience a little bit of a more personalized perspective, which I think maybe is sometimes missing in these abstract conversations. And so I want to thank Khoi and Simten again for being with us today. Thank you so much. Thank you to those in the audience for your questions. And we'll look forward to continuing these conversations in other venues. So thank you so much, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.